There's a fine line between an admission to a mental facility or a psych ward, which I've had plenty of when I was younger, or a spiritual awakening. Carl Jung as well says a lot of people say in their own way, there's only enough room in the psychosis or in the craziness for one person. So if you can meet somebody that can jump in there with you and isn't fearful of that, they can almost walk you back out. That if you grew up 1,000 years ago and you were in that time, you probably would have been taken to the shamaness or the shaman or somebody, and you would have gone into some sort of apprenticeship or training, because that would have been more of a gift more than something that we need to medicate out of you and lock you away and change you. Like I think it's part of the evolution process for a lot of people. And I think a lot of us choose this to a degree before we come. There's this battle all the time, and the American Indians talk about the parable of the black wolf and the white wolf, and that these things are born into us and they're almost at a fight to the death. And the one you feed is the one that wins. We think we are our mind, but our mind is a part of us that's instilled in us to solve problems. And what it does is, if we don't have a problem, it'll create one so that it has a job. Well, that's what the mind is doing to us all the time. It's almost like saying, I've got to be busy, so if there's no problem, I'm going to create one. And I think that's where a lot of our problems come from, realising that the problems we create are purely so the mind has a job.
Why not have it be instantaneous? Why are there so many almost pitfalls as we achieve greater levels of enlightenment?
I think as humans, once we've accomplished something, we want to move on to the next thing. And I think personally it would be too easy. Like I've thought about this a lot, that if I have had, whether they're psychotic episodes or spiritual experiences, there's a fine line. You know, they say there's a fine line between an admission to a mental facility or a psych ward, which I've had plenty of when I was younger, or a spiritual awakening. So for me, I think that if it came too quickly and too easily, I think it would almost be what's next for us. I think, to me, there's a journey. I do believe that we know where we've been, and I do believe that we will know that again. You know, and Alan Watts, amazing philosopher, right? If anybody's heard of Alan Watts, and I'm sure they have, you know, English philosopher, there's so much amazing talks by him, and just his voice and his wisdom. Well, he ended up drinking himself to death. He drank and smoked himself to death. Not much older than me or you, really, all in his mid to late 50s. And if you listen to his early stuff, it was so profound. And I think I could never say this, but this is my intuition, that what happened to him was he got it so deeply, so quickly, that then there was nothing really left to accomplish for him in this life. And then he just drank his life away and literally died of lung cancer really early. And if I see that, and I'm dumbfounded. I think, how could somebody with so much wisdom drink and drug their life away to the point where it killed them? And I'm trying to give an explanation as why it's not too easy. I think if all of a sudden right now we had a true spiritual experience and we're connected with whatever's next or whatever come before, or like you said, all of it, it's all happening simultaneously, right? It feels like it's not, but it is. Time doesn't exist. And I still, even though I say that, I still really have to work hard to get my head around how doesn't time exist. But yeah, my simple answer is, I think it would be for us humans, what's next?
For individuals whom are experiencing what one might call a spiritual awakening, and it is a lot to process at one time, how would you, or what would you say to somebody who might be feeling as if they're starting to experience more of a negative aspect of this psychosis? How do you keep them and that on that positive side, so that way they don't ultimately lose their minds?
Good question, because there's been periods in my life where I felt like I was losing my mind. I felt like I was meditating and reading and studying and so hard that I feel like there was a few times where I felt like I almost popped out of my body, like, and I couldn't get back in because I think I wanted it so much. And because I am an addict, I dedicated so much time and energy into doing that. And I think sometimes what Carl Jung as well says is, and a lot of people say in their own way, there's only enough room in the psychosis or in the craziness for one person. So if you can meet somebody that can jump in there with you and isn't fearful of that, they can almost walk you back out. I think what happens these days is, because we're so fearful of, and you guys more than me over there in that part of the world, everyone wants to fucking sue everybody for anything, malpractice, or I think it's finding somebody who's not afraid to sit with you and almost what I said earlier, almost normalize the way you're feeling, that if you grew up 1,000 years ago and you were in that time, you probably would have been taken to the shamaness or the shaman or somebody, and you would have gone into some sort of apprenticeship or training, because that would have been more of a gift more than something that we need to medicate out of you and lock you away and change you. Like I think it's part of the evolution process for a lot of people. And I think a lot of us choose this to a degree before we come. And I don't mean, I'm not like this, okay, well, yeah, we choose our exact who we're going to marry and where we're going to live. But I do think that there's some sort of, and whether it's us choosing it or whether it's that, source part of us that's in there, because it's almost a strange thing, right? Like in all beliefs, it's like God is out there, but also God is within. Well, how can that happen simultaneously? Or, is it a man on a cloud, or is it that part of us that wants to help the old lady carry her groceries from the supermarket for no gain other than we want to be a better human being, or we want to be a better spiritual being, or, it could be when we let that person out in traffic when it wasn't really their turn. Like, all these things are spiritual practices, but they also come with a humanness to them. If I let that person out in traffic and I'm not aware and they don't acknowledge me and tell me what a great person I am for letting them out, then I almost want to kill them. So there's this battle all the time, and the American Indians talk about the parable of the black wolf and the white wolf, and that these things are born into us and they're almost at a fight to the death. And the one you feed is the one that wins. So it's not directly about going for I know I'm off topic here of what the question you asked, but it's really sitting with somebody. I get a lot of people come in that are suicidal. I hope none of my supervisors or the governing body over here is listening to this. None of them have suicided since I've worked for myself. I had a couple years ago when I worked in an organisation, and there's just nothing you can do, but none of them have ended up suiciding, and I haven't had to send them to any institutions. I've been able to work through that, because sometimes suicide is just, well, not sometimes, majority of the time, suicide is just an escape from the way we feel. And when I ask them a question like, do you want to escape the way you're feeling, or do you want to actually die? That is almost like a slap across the face, that metaphorically, that sort of snaps them out of it. No, I don't want to die, I just want the pain to stop. And then it's okay, and then we work on practice. It's okay, well, what can we do for the pain to stop? Rather than, because I know a lot of people in this field around the world, the minute that somebody shared that with them, they would probably be calling, over here we call it I think it's the CAT team. Obviously I've got the number stored in my phone if I really needed it for somebody, but it's a crisis admission team or something, and then an ambulance will come out, and then they'll obviously take them to a facility against their will a lot of the time. And a lot of the time that's more detrimental, because what that does is then that makes them lose faith in the person that they thought they could trust. In saying that, if somebody was really, like, the questions I ask is, and we're completely off topic here, but we're not. The questions I ask is, have you got a plan? Do you know when you're going to do it? If they tell me they're going to hang themselves, I'm like, okay, well, have you been researching how to tie the knots? Have you got the rope at home? If there's a few of those risk factors that are done, then we've got to do something. Whether it's, I'll even say to them, if you don't go home and bring the rope back into me in the next hour, just drop it outside my office door and I'll throw it in the bin, then I'm going to have to call someone further. So there's ways around this where I think what happens is most people freak out because they feel responsible for that other person. Like, and I know this sounds really pessimistic, but there's 168 hours in a week. So that means there's over 600 hours in a month or 330 hours in a fortnight. If somebody comes to see me for 1 hour a fortnight out of 330, that means they got 28, almost about 327 hours left between seeing me that is left to them. How much difference can I make? Well, I can make a difference in that hour, and that's why I try and give them the best I've got.
That's so interesting. I've actually thought about that before when it comes to people who have suicidal ideations, but not necessarily have a plan, but it's on their minds. And if you do have an individual, and for anyone listening, if you are feeling that way, please go seek help. But when you are feeling that way, there is almost this stopgap that I came to you because I was feeling that way and I want something to happen, but I did not want to get sent to a psych ward. So it's definitely crossed my mind before on like what are some better ways to deal with that. But one thing I want to dive into is when we were talking about suicide and we brought up addiction earlier, and both of them being forms of escapism. When we also talk about the parable of the white and black wolf, and it's which one you choose to feed. How, if at all, does that relate to utilizing meditation, prayer, and other aspects of spirituality to achieve a higher level of consciousness, which on some levels could be viewed as escapism because you don't want to experience this particular reality, but you're choosing a higher form of consciousness or deeper levels of of deeper levels of consciousness, deeper levels of awareness through your meditation. You're still escaping the reality, but you're feeding a wolf that on most people's scales would be considered positive or good.
Yeah, there's a really good book by Arnold Mindell called, he was a guy who invented process-oriented psychology. That's what I studied under process work. And he talks in his book, How to Work on Yourself Alone, a lot about meditation as escapism or meditation as going inward. And I think that for me, meditation I used to do a lot of guided meditations and I'd really love the feeling it gave me, all that. It was almost like an orgasm in your body if you meditate long enough. And I think there was a bit of an addictive process in that as well, which was escapism. And I think that got me to where I am now. So for anybody out there, it's a lot better than using drugs and alcohol or food or sex or whatever, because it is going in. But I think a meditation for me, it's more about catching the thoughts. In Zen Buddhism, they talk about the 10 ox herding pictures and the ox almost being this mind of ours, and then the ox herder being that source part of us or that godlike part of us. And so for me, when I meditate, it looks like this. I sit down and I close my eyes and I'm trying to go inward, and then my brain is like, oh fuck, I wonder how this podcast is going to go this morning. I really hope that my Wi-Fi signal is good because it's a bit cloudy. And then I'll catch myself and come back to the moment. Okay, Chad, let's just try and just be at peace now. And then the next minute it's, it might be 10 seconds later, might be 30 seconds later, might be a minute later if I'm lucky, or 5 minutes later, which is very rare. If I'm truthful, it's very rare that it's 5 minutes or even 3 minutes. And then it's like, oh, did you pay that water bill yesterday? And then I've got to catch the brain and bring it back to the moment. So what it is doing is, it is rejoining those neural pathways and bringing the unconscious. Because the minds, and Buddhism talks about this, there's a parable in Buddhism that virtually says that the mind is a terrible master and a brilliant servant. And the reason why is the mind's job, we think we are our mind, and this is Eckhart Tolle sort of stuff with the power of now. We think we are our mind, but our mind is a part of us that's instilled in us to solve problems. And what it does is, if we don't have a problem, it'll create one so that it has a job. And I used to be a tradie, I used to be a plumber. And the way I describe that, because as you know if you read my book yet, that my book definitely isn't textbook. Like, you're not going to find many of these things, because I would explain to somebody, our mind is almost like when I'm the boss and I'm charging $100 an hour to work on this person's house, and there's 3 of us there, and the apprentice is slackening off and the owner turns up. I'm almost saying, before they turn up, I don't care what you fucking do, look busy, because this lady or this person's paying us good money, and if you're just standing around doing nothing, that looks bad on us. Go clean up, do whatever you can to look busy. Well, that's what the mind is doing to us all the time. It's almost like saying, I've got to be busy, so if there's no problem, I'm going to create one. And I think that's where a lot of our problems come from, realising that the problems we create are purely so the mind has a job. And if we can get that, that's the black wolf, right? If we can purely understand that we don't really have a problem, and the problem to solve really isn't like 2,000 years ago, we were solving, I understand we're solving problems now, probably more so, but we're always on guard. There was someone that always had to look out for the tiger or the lion or the elephant, or we lived in caves. And so I think we've evolved to always be on guard. And now that we actually don't have those sort of security problems, if we look at, I know I'm talking about a lot of stuff here, but if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the bottom rung for us to be sort of whole as a human being, we need air, food and water. That's the physiological needs. The next step up from that is security. And then after that comes love and belonging and all the other things. So number one, air, food, water. And then the next one up from that is shelter. We've got those things down pat now. Like we pretty much understand in a lot of parts of the world, and I can only speak for, I've travelled a lot, but living, I can only speak for Australia, and there is a bit of homelessness happening now, but the majority of us have that bottom one covered, the air, food and water. So that then what happens is as the next one comes up, I think the mind, and there's actually, I'll finish ranting on this part now for you, but there's a correlation, there's this real small window of tolerance on finances where under the poverty line or under living comfortably, obviously the mental health or, you know, overall well-being and the way we see ourselves and experience the world is pretty low. Once we get to sort of, you know, being able to have a holiday once in a while, pay our bills within reason, once we go up a bit further and we start to become wealthy, it's amazing how much the happiness levels actually go down again. So like everything, there's this sweet spot in the middle where, and I see that now with a few people around me that are retiring, where they've got all this money, they've hoarded it and they've busted their ass and they've been a tight ass their whole life. And then now they're in their 70s, mid 70s, late 70s, and they're wondering what it was all about because they've got, you know, $500,000 in the bank. They've got enough toys that they want, especially in Australia here, cars and motorbikes, and they're probably people I associate with because that's a hobby of mine. And they almost spend all day on Facebook Marketplace looking for something to buy that is going to make them feel good.
Mm. Interesting. You know, you mentioned the hierarchy of needs and you talked about the neural pathways, and earlier on we talked a lot about the subconscious programmings. When you have people who have, for all intents and purposes, achieved material success, but haven't worked on perhaps that right brain, the intuitive aspects that make them feel a little bit more whole without having a physical, tangible item, how do you help someone to use their neuroplasticity in a positive way, so that way they're not leaning on external material things, devices, aspects to fulfill that dopamine that they're getting when they're buying something new, when they're touching something new, when they're really trying to feel a hit, a high? How do you help somebody to expand their minds and not rely so heavily on what's known as the monkey mind?
Well, therapy only really, like this sort of work only works in surrender. And this is what I say to when they come in for couples therapy. I'll explain to them, if one of you guys wants to do therapy and the other person is coming under compliance, until we can start to turn that into surrender, it's not going to work. Because otherwise I'm dealing with the black wolf. He's thinking, if she wants them to come in for couples therapy and he's thinking, this guy's a fucking idiot, I'd rather spend my time making work so I can go make more money so I can put more fuel in the fishing boat tomorrow. And So number one thing on that is it only works under surrender. And my father is one of these people that, you know, he's got more cars, I'm sort of mindful on how I say this, but he's got more cars and more toys than you could, and he sort of said to me the other day, oh, look at this one. And I asked him, so he goes, do you reckon I should get it? And he's at retirement and he's done pretty well for himself financially. And now I think it's almost, what was this all about? So I get to see it firsthand, but still, because the collapse hasn't happened, you can't really get in there with anybody. So the way I work on it is, generally how it happens is, say somebody's busted their ass and they've sacrificed themselves and then they get to 60 years old and then they get cancer. And then they're really questioning, what was all this about? I've never been on a holiday. I've got 4 houses. And I see a lot of this in Australia, right? There's a lot of this whole get an investment property and get another one and get another one. And then I see these people working their full-time jobs and then spending all their weekends doing gardening at all these investment properties. So they literally then on the weekend, they become a lawn mowing business just for their investment properties and doing gardening and painting and maintenance. And, you know, so I guess for them, while we're caught in it, it's a bit like an addict. When we're caught in it, we can't see it. It's almost like we cannot see it. So when somebody comes to me, it's generally because something has collapsed or something has happened for them that's made them question what, you know, my story was, I suppose I can speak for me. My story was that I wanted all these things by the time I was 40. You know, I wanted a Harley, I wanted a drag car, I wanted hot rod, I wanted to pay my house off. I wanted all these things by the time I was 40. This was the goals I set materially, and then I set them all and I achieved them by 39. And then everybody on the outside was almost looking in thinking, wow, he's made it. And then on the inside, I still felt like shit, and I had everything on the outside that I expected was going to bring me happiness. And then I ended up leaving my relationship because the only thing left, right, could be her, is the reason why I'm not happy. And she was a good woman, but we weren't overly aligned in this spiritual work and things like that. So I think it sort of had to happen that way, but it happened pretty quickly. And then there was a massive collapse for me. And then that's when I really could, even though I'd been on this journey, that was when I could really understand, because I'd had the experience of it. So where I'm going with that is, I can only work with somebody when there's a level of collapse, because if that egocentric barrier is so strong, it generally needs some sort of brick out of it or some sort of penetration in the wall. It's a bit like Sufi, who was a Islamic poet, right? He talks about, you know, that the crack is where the light gets in. He's got a poem, and then Leonard Cohen has got a song about the same thing. So what they're talking about there is, and I write about these sort of things in my book, it's only when the crack happens that we can get that in. So how do we work with it? We really get them to understand that, well, this was part of the journey to get you to here, to have the crack. So instead of getting angry at yourself, because that's what that is, that's the egocentricity. It's almost like you catch it out and it runs around the back door and tries to get back into your psyche that way. It's a bit like the person that has tried to kill themselves, which I've worked with before. So that this wolf in them, this black wolf, or this egocentric thinking, or whatever we want to call it, this devil part of them, it doesn't really matter what the name we put to it. In Buddhism, they'd call it samsara. But it tells them, life's so shit, you should kill yourself, right? It's not them. They're taken hostage by this black wolf inside of them. So then they have a suicide attempt, which is a proper one, and then they survive. And then all of a sudden, guess what the black wolf does? It says, oh, wow, you're a piece of shit. How could you kill yourself? How could you try and kill yourself? You're a piece of shit. So the thing I try and work on is, it's this voice in our head that's telling us to do all these things. It's a voice in the head that tells us the next car will make us happy. If we change house will make us happy. You know, a new kitchen will make us happy. A nice bathroom that we can take photos of and put on Instagram will make us happy. Like, I was a plumber, right? So I've built some pretty flash houses, and I've worked in a lot of flash houses up until 10 years ago, when I was always in this field, but I did it voluntarily because I was so young. When I started this work, I was so young. I was 22 and I was volunteering at rehabs and detoxes, and I knew that I needed the life experience. before I could make this a career. So where I'm going with that is, it's like we spend all this money on things that don't fucking matter. Like at the end of our life on our deathbed, are we going to be thinking, fuck, I'm glad I built that house with those 2 basins and those amazing wall to ceiling tiles, and I put the twin shower heads on, and me and my partner never actually had a shower in there together, but it really fucking looked good in the pictures on Instagram when we sold the house. So I think until we get to that point, because it sort of sounds a bit pessimistic, right? It sort of sounds like I'm bagging out people that want to live like that, but that was me. For anyone listening, that was me. And what happened to me after these collapses and these parts where I had all these things and I still felt like shit. That's when I went deeper, and that's when I ran into a man, and then some groups of people that were able to hold me through that process.
I would love to dive more into some of the aspects you were touching on, such as the torus field that exists around everyone and how we project the energy that's not ours because most of us don't know how to ground, or people don't know how to work through it utilizing somatic therapy. But Chad, we only have a few minutes left. Is there anything you'd like to leave with the audience before we go?
No, just if anyone's out there that likes what I've said, this is probably my first and only book. So it's pretty blunt and it's pretty raw. It's full of language, and it talks a lot about this stuff we're talking about here. I have tried to condense it as much as I can and kept it real. And the majority of reviews that I've been getting was almost like I was having a conversation with you. It was like we just sat down and had a conversation like we have here, which is what I wanted for the book. I didn't want. There's a lot of people out there so much smarter than me, writing textbooks and with a lot more scientific and understanding. What I've tried to do is, I think I've tried to put myself into this book, is what I'm saying. So it's almost, talk about energy. I've virtually condensed myself, my life's journey into this book. And then I'm hoping when somebody reads it, that then almost that energy comes back into them. And I'm hoping in the near future to start running groups where, and it won't be like a $1,500 for 10 sessions. It'll be maybe a $20 a month subscription, and then maybe run two groups a week on Zoom to sort of process a lot of this stuff, real life stuff where we can meet together. I want to keep it affordable and regular so that it's not breaking people's bank account, that we can get a movement of people around that are showing up and then doing this sort of work, like what we're doing here. Like, I'll leave this conversation with you so much richer for the day. I know you're at the other end of your day and I'm coming to you from the future. It's Friday morning here in Australia. The sun's just coming up, but that's why I was drinking my large coffee. But where I'm going with that is, so for me, I want to give as much to the world as I can. And 10% of all book sales go to charity for this one. There's a charity in Bali that gives fresh water, it gives wheelchairs, it gives water filtration to communities in Indonesia. A lot of places out there have got it pretty tough right now, and I understand there's a lot of people around here doing it tough as well. But so to me, all 10% of all book sales go to them guys because they are doing amazing work. I don't know. There's thanks for having me on. I'd love to have you on my podcast, and I'd love, for anyone listening out there, you can follow me at Chad Taylor, it's you, on Instagram, on TikTok. If you can't afford my book and you want one, it's not overly expensive, but if you want one and you can't afford it, if you just find me on TikTok or Instagram, send me a message. I'll get you a free digital copy that you can read. This book was never about making money. It was always about trying to reach people.
Thank you so much, Chad, for coming on. And thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of Blaine Soup. We have all that information written down in the description.